Welcome to the Mom Founders Table. Pull up a chair and join me every week as I become your thought partner and help you lead to create change. I'm your host, Kelsey Kenry, entrepreneur, millionaire mom of three, and strategic business coach for established mom entrepreneurs. Every week, you will get tactical guidance to apply to your business, leadership, and life that will help you further your true success while also being invited into a new way of thinking and being that creates true freedom. I'm here to call you out and call you up, so take a seat and let's begin. Welcome back to another episode of the Mom Founders Table. And today we have a podcast specialist for moms on the podcast. So I think that's very fun because I know I have had a podcast. I've reinvented my podcast multiple times, but I have found that my podcast has been such a great place for me to use my voice, to amplify my voice. It's a great tool for business for people to kind of like dig in and see like, what is this chick all about? How does she talk? How does she move? What does she care about? So I'm really excited to dig into this today because I think that I was saying this to my podcast producer, I think it was yesterday or the day before. I'm like, I believe everybody should have a podcast. So I'm interested to hear your opinion and specifically learn more about you teaching around visibility. And I love the approach that you have on like, you don't actually need a big audience. So we're going to dig into all those things today. So pull up a seat, take a listen, and welcome Jenny today. Jenny, tell us more about you. Where are you from? What do you do? And what are you here to say today?
Yeah, so thanks for having me. I'm Jenny. I am a podcast strategist for mom entrepreneurs. I've been in the podcasting industry since 2018, so going on a decade now. I mean, we're in 2026, so feels crazy to say that. But yeah, I've been in business since 2016, so I've been in business 10 years. Been focusing on podcasting for 8 of those 10 years, and yeah, I just found a love for podcasting after starting my own podcast in 2018, and then from there I started helping other people with their shows because like being a podcast producer, podcast manager wasn't like as common back then. It's definitely been more common over the past couple years. And yeah, I just really fell in love with the whole process of helping people get their voice out into the world. So helping them launch, but also like grow their show and get in front of new listeners with search engine optimization for their podcast, as well as helping them be a guest on podcasts too, because those are like my two favorite like ways to get visible with your own show. So that's what I enjoy talking about. And yeah, I could talk about podcasting pretty much all day.
Before we hop back in the episode, I need to tell you something. And this is especially for the woman who has been listening to the show for a while now. I know you're running a business. I know you're really good at what you do. And I know that your business results have shown that. And I know you're also in this uncomfortable position where you are seeking what's next. You know that something has to change in the way that you're running your business and the way that you're operating inside of your business. And you're too busy to figure out exactly what those blind spots are and how to fill them. And I know this feeling because I've lived it. I've also been in a mastermind that I paid $25,000 for, and I was just another number, another person on her roster. And so when I built the Mom Founders Table Mastermind, I built it with my private advisory in mind. This means that all of my advisory is coming from knowing your business and knowing you at a deeper level. So this isn't like any other mastermind that you've ever been in. This is private advisory where we give you a full assessment, a full analysis. We're doing quarterly reviews for you. We're giving you your priorities. We're identifying your blind spots. We're making sure that you are fully taken care of. So that way, the connections, the community, the retreat, the City Girls event, all of that becomes an added layer that makes the experience that much more rich. So I want you to really think about what you've built and where you're going, and know that you're going to have somebody in your corner that can identify those blind spots and help you become the who you need to be to run the next version of your business, while also giving you the strategic guidance of the how. And this is what is inside the Mom Founders Table Mastermind. You can see all the details about it at the link down in the show notes. So head down there, check it out, and I'll see you inside.
Yeah. And then are you a mom yourself?
I am. I have 2 kids. I have a 6-year-old and a 2.5-year-old. So
Okay. So you started your business pre-kids.
yes.
So how
Lucky
has your
me.
business shifted? Same, sister. How has your business shifted since you had kids?
Yeah, it's changed a lot. So I had my first in 2020. So we, obviously the pandemic, that was fun.
Yeah.
And then,
Not a
also
great time.
becoming a first time mom in the pandemic, that was definitely, a challenge. I knew that I wanted to have kids like when I started my business. So I tried to make my business as like flexible and kid friendly as possible. But like, let's be honest, we don't really know what having kids are like until they're actually here. Cause there's one there, you can plan all you want and then your kid gets here and they're not going to stick to your plans. So my business has changed quite a bit. In the pandemic, I had built like an 8-person agency because podcasting was popping. Everyone was starting a podcast. And now in 2026, it's just me and one team member. So I've scaled back down. But yeah, things have definitely changed. I used to be able to work whenever I wanted. Now I focus on a 20-hour work week for the most part. So a lot of things have changed. I've stuck with podcasting, but the way I work, the things I work on, my team size, all those things have changed since becoming a mom. So,
You know what's interesting that I just heard in what you said that I talk with clients a lot about is like finding the right size business for you in your life. And I have seen, obviously, being in this space for 15 years, a lot of people follow kind of a similar trajectory to where it's like you start the thing, you build the thing, and you keep following the steps. And like to me, it
mhm.
very much mirrors like a corporate ladder in the entrepreneur world, right? Of like,
Right.
this is the next step to like elevate to the next level. And then I've had quite a few clients come to me that are like at that high level, that are at that agency level, because a lot of my clients are very established and like making the money and doing the
Mhm.
things. And they're like, yeah, this is not what I thought it would be. Like, this doesn't feel great. Like, I'm
Yeah.
working too much. It's like the money is like the only thing that's cool, but like
Mhm.
the exchange for the money doesn't feel good. And
Right,
so I
right.
think
Because you're still
it's
managing a team and all that
right.
stuff. It's a lot. It's a lot of mental, and it's different too. Like I like being really hands-on with my clients. So like I felt like I was losing that when I had a bigger team. Like I could still do
Hmm.
like the strategy side of things, but I don't know. I just like to be like really hands-on with my clients. And I felt like it's easy to get lost in that when you have a bunch of people on your team because you can just delegate easily. So
Sure. Yeah. And I think, it's like different strokes for different folks. But I think like the cool thing here is like, I feel like we're giving all the listeners permission right now of like, your success in business isn't a certain model or like a
right.
certain destination. It's like being able to evolve and say, this doesn't feel good, or I want to change this, or I actually like the like smaller, leaner approach. And like all of them are okay, right? Like we don't
Hmm.
have to
Hmm.
say one is better than the other. So in your podcasting experience, one of the things that I think is really cool that you mentioned too is like SEO for podcasting,
Hmm.
right? And so tell me like how do these things intersect and what are you teaching your clients around SEO and how is that helping them in their businesses?
Yeah, so it's not like the exact same as it would be for Google SEO. Like, sure, like if you put up a blog post, then you would follow how you would like a regular blog post and then associate it back to your podcast. But podcast SEO is a little bit different. It's like within podcasting apps like Spotify and Apple Podcasts. So that's what we're optimizing for. So the first step here is really like making sure that your title is searchable. So a lot of people, their titles are fun and cutesy, but like no one's searching that. For you, yours is actually pretty searchable to have mom founders. Like that is something that people can type into a search bar and actually find your show. Most people don't have anything like that. They just call it like something fun and cutesy that no one's ever going to Google ever. Another thing that I've noticed a lot of people have like the word "the" as their first word in their podcast title. And like that is using total valuable real estate. So, I mean, I'm not sure if you have it in your podcast name or if it's just like on your cover art or something, but that word "the" is like you're taking away where your main keyword could be that first word, like mom entrepreneur, whatever. That
Okay.
keyword is, that's a valuable real estate. So if anyone's listening to this and they have a podcast and the word "the" is their very first word in their podcast title, like on, your podcast host, I would get rid of that because your show doesn't need the word "the" to be what it is, right? It's just
It's
kind of
like a
a
word that we
word.
throw in there because we're like,
Yeah,
this
exactly.
makes it
Yeah, you think you need it, but you don't. It can still be on your cover art. It can still be like other
sure.
places, but it just doesn't need to be in like the actual like name field. And then we have your name field for it would be like your name Kelsey, and then that usually people just have their first and last name. but you can actually add keywords there. So you would add in, whatever your title is, whatever that searchable thing. So mine says podcast growth strategist for mom entrepreneurs or something like that. So podcast growth is a keyword, podcast growth strategist is a keyword, mom entrepreneur is a keyword, mom is a keyword. So
okay,
if they search all those things,
like Instagram, so where it's like your Instagram name, like make it your name.
Yeah,
your personal brand.
Yeah.
But then
but you can add in like extra things. Yeah.
Is like mine's like female founder advisor.
Yeah, exactly. So people can like search that. And then the same thing with your podcast name. You can add like whatever your podcast name is, you can add like a little separator or like a colon and then add in like a keyword extension. So mine says podcast growth, podcast launch, and podcast SEO strategies for mom entrepreneurs or something like that. And then podcast launch is a keyword, podcast growth is a keyword, podcast SEO by itself is a keyword, mom entrepreneurs, all those things are all searchable. So they can find my show by typing in all those things. And then, you want to make sure your podcast description is optimized. So your like overall show description, you want to make sure you have all the keywords there that people would be searching to find a show like yours. Another little hack for there too, that I always recommend doing is like having a section that says like, in this podcast, we answer questions such as, and it would be like actual questions that people would be Googling, because then your show is more likely to pop up that way too. If people are like typing in actual questions into the search bar. So those are like my few little quick hacks. And those are things that just take like maybe 20 minutes max to optimize all those things. And then, from there, you can work on your episode titles and your episode descriptions and stuff like that. That's going to be a longer game, because if you want to go back, you have 50 plus episodes in your archives, you're going to want to go back and fix those, but that's not something you're going to do today. But like, this is something you can actually do today. You can fix your name, you can fix your name field, you can fix your podcast name, and you can optimize your description really quickly. And then going forward, you can work on your new episode titles and your new descriptions, and then slowly go back and edit your old ones. So wow. But it makes a big difference. I've seen because every time I'm a guest on someone's show and I talk about podcasting, the host usually goes and fixes their own show, and then a week or two later they come back.
Immediately my team is taking this transcript and fixing all
exactly. So yeah, everyone usually comes back to me, like the host comes back to me like a week or two later and like, oh my God, my downloads grew by 50 to 150% just because I changed this keyword or something like that in my title or something like that. So it makes a big difference really quickly. And then you can go back and optimize your older stuff to help that continue growing. But yeah, it's like a big shift, like almost immediately if you use the right keywords, of course.
Yeah, I feel like it's such a reminder of sometimes the things that move the needle the most can be these small shifts. And I think that a lot of times as women in business, we're looking for this like revolutionary breakthrough for like everything. And I'm like, sometimes it's literally just taking enough time to have a conversation with somebody that can see the gaps and tell you what the gaps are and how to fix them, that can change everything. So I appreciate a good tactical move in there.
Yeah, I feel like tactical can be boring sometimes, but it usually is what moves the needle.
For sure. It's always like, I always say, I'm like, you have to have the who and the how, because we can have the how, right? Of like, you could give me all of these tips right now about my podcast, but like, if I think I'm a shitty podcaster, if I think I don't have a voice worth sharing or ideas worth sharing, then like, I'm not going to go implement any of this.
Right. Because you don't want more visibility, probably.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. So it's like, yes, like the tactical pieces move, like you have to have both. You have to have some sort of plan. You have to have, I couldn't imagine like coaching my clients through a hard time and just being like the mirroring and the breakthrough and the finding the belief underneath, and then not giving them being like, okay, we'll just leave it there. Not saying like,
right.
Now go
like now you're all built up and you feel good, but now like, you don't know what actually to do.
Yeah. Okay. So you've obviously listened to a lot of podcasts. You've produced a lot of podcasts. You've been behind the scenes, a lot of podcasts. So I want to know, like, if you had to break it down into like top performing podcasts, what are like the top 3 to 5 things that those podcasts are doing? And then what are like the 3 to 5 mistakes that you see most frequently? Start whichever way you want to go.
Let's start with like the good. I always like to do the good and then the bad. I would say the good things they're doing is the top, like the people who are doing well, a lot of them already do have a like somewhat built-in audience. Like of course, the people who are doing well, they're going to have some sort of audience. Like it is hard to build from scratch. I'm not going to pretend that it's not. You don't need to have a humongous audience, but like that definitely helps. Like, let's be real. Like anyone who starts a podcast and already has a built-in audience, it's just going to be helpful. But aside from that, the SEO piece is really huge. Like honing in on that from like day one is big. Another thing is having like a clear bridge from your show to whatever you're offering in your business. Like most people don't have these podcasts just for fun. I mean, you might, that's great. If it's a hobby podcast, that's totally fine. But most business owners podcasts they don't want it to be a hobby, but it ends up being a hobby if they don't do this. So having like a clear bridge from episode to offer, most people they don't have that. They're like, oh, I have this great podcast episode. And then they're like, follow my show or leave a review or something like that, but they're not actually sending them back to, to their community or to an offer or anything where they can connect with them further. Because a podcast, it can serve all areas of your funnel, but I think it does pretty good. Like I would say probably best as a top of funnel, but you have to get them elsewhere because with a podcast, as you know, as a host, you can't really see that much information. You can see like,
right,
they came from, they're listening from the United States and Texas and maybe the city as well. But like, you can't see that it's Jenny listening from Texas, it's just like, that's all you get. You don't get to like see their data at all, aside from where they're tuning in from. Mm-hmm. So you have to kind of bring them elsewhere to your email list, to another type of community, so you can actually connect with them, because it's kind of a one-way street if they're just sitting there consuming. And, sometimes people will DM you on Instagram or something like that, but like, that's not everyone. That's not going to be everyone. Not everyone's going to do that. They might be too shy. They might be like, oh, wait, what if she doesn't respond to me? Or maybe that's just not their personality type. Like I'm personally not that person that's going to go and DM someone on Instagram after I listen to an episode, because I'm kind of introverted. Like that's just not going to be my go-to. So you have to give more like passive ways for them to get deeper into your funnel. This could be a free offer. It could be a community. It could even just send them to like a low cost paid offer. It doesn't need to be anything crazy, but you got to bridge the gap between episode to getting deeper into your world. And I guess that was kind of both something people are doing good, but also a mistake. And then I would say the third thing that people are doing like that, people are like, if they have a really successful podcast and, they're doing well with it, is, they're utilizing other growth strategies aside from SEO and aside from like having guests. And I would say that strategy would be they're guesting on other shows, because podcast listeners, we are pretty loyal to our podcasts that we listen to. And we do trust the recommendations of people who are, who bring others onto their show. Like if someone hears you on someone else's show, they're like, oh, I love this podcast. I listen to it every week. I am going to trust this recommendation because she brought this other lady onto the show. She vetted her. She thought she was a good fit. So I'm going to trust this lady. And then they go and listen to that person's podcast and become like a loyal podcast listener of theirs and things like that. So, and it's much easier to keep people in the app, right? Instead of like sending them off to your website or Instagram, they're just going and subscribing to your podcast within the same app that they're probably already using. So I would say those would be the top three things. And then kind of mistakes, same thing, like they're not utilizing SEO, they're not utilizing podcast guesting, and then they don't have like a clear bridge from episode to offer. Their call to action is kind of weak, or they don't have one at all. So, or they have too many. There's three things. They have too many calls to action where they're sending people to 30 different things. They don't have any at all, or it just doesn't make sense to the episode. Like maybe they're talking about in the episode, like launching a podcast, but then their call to action is like, go download my podcast growth kind of resource, which is like, okay, well, they haven't even launched. Why are they trying to grow? So yeah. So I would say those are like the three mistakes and things that people are doing well.
Yeah. And like incredible insights, because I think anybody that has a podcast or wants to have a podcast could really learn from those things. And like, one of the things that I'm hearing in all this is like, I think people forget that podcasting is marketing. As silly as that sounds, like it is a piece of a bigger ecosystem. And so for me, like if I have a client who's like, I want to start a podcast, then I'm like, let's pull the whole ecosystem and let's see like, where is this, how does this fit? And what does this drive to? Because everything that you're saying, you're seeing that from like a strategic place, right? Like, which is where my brain is of like, okay, if we're going to add something, it needs to make sense. It needs to link with other things. It needs to be part of that ecosystem. And so I think it's just a great reminder of that in itself, is like, there's a lot of people that I feel like I want a podcast because it's like, I want to talk about this stuff that's cool, or I really care about this thing. And it's like, yes. Also, does it make sense? Does it fit? Does it, does it work with the offers that you have? Are you building the correct structure? Do you have somebody? Do you have a funnel that works well if you're going to drive the free offer? Like, because I see a lot of times that people will start a podcast, realize that it's like more work than they thought, and then they quit. But it's really because they didn't look at it like as a full ecosystem of like, they didn't have a lead magnet, they didn't have a next step, or their call to actions was weak.
They thought about, let's start the podcast, but they didn't like think about anything after that. Like, okay, like I want to. They spent like all their time researching tech gear and like what podcast hosts to use, but not like, ooh, what am I going to talk about, or how does this actually make sense in the overall like, sense of my business? Because most people don't think about that. And then like once they get to like episode 7, they're like, oh, actually I should probably make sure this connects, or maybe even takes a lot. I've seen people like get to episode 50, like they've been podcasting for nearly a year, and then they finally realize, oh, none of this was really strategic. It's been fun, but it hasn't been really strategic. And they wonder why they're not making money from their podcast, or even why their downloads are not where they want them to be. And like some niches are gonna do better than others, right? Like that's just a given. But if you're not seeing any growth at all in downloads, money, or anything, it's time to reevaluate and see like, okay, what am I missing here?
Right. And the cool thing is like, I know that you mentioned this earlier, but like the great thing about a podcast is I think it does serve at multiple, it's one of the tools that serves at multiple places of the funnel. Because you can have it as like, because when you think about podcasts as marketing, I always say like marketing is about layering, right? And so you will have buyers that may see like one piece of social media content and be like, this is my person, but that is more rare. What we typically see is we have like, they see a social media post and then they go click the link in your bio. They're like, they have a podcast, they listen to the podcast, they download the free thing, then they get your email. So it's like this layering effect. So I think a lot of people would, if they think in terms of that, which is how like I'm always trying to like bring my clients, like step them out of their business enough to see that full picture of like, we have all these tools, let's get them in the right order. And so how do you help your clients with like the strategy behind the podcast, but beyond the tactical kind of like, here, do these things for the actual podcast, when you're backing up and you're looking at like how this fits, what are the things that you're looking at, or what are the things you're recommending for people to make it work well?
Yeah, I mean, I always like you mentioned, I like to look at the overall picture too. And a lot of people don't do that. I feel like a lot of podcast producers, like they focused on like, okay, here, let me get your episodes edited and out into the world. I'm just going to take what you're creating and help you make that sound a little bit better. But they're not like thinking about the strategy side behind like, okay, what offers are we talking about? What offers are we promoting? And let's tie that back into the podcast. And that's where I feel like I stand apart from some other podcast producers. I mean, not everyone, I'm sure there's plenty that do what I do, but also, having that growth strategy piece. So going to the client every, quarter, we plan quarterly. I plan with them like, okay, what are you launching this quarter? How can we tie your podcast episodes back to this? And, we work backwards and get that situated so that their podcast episodes actually are, serving whatever they're launching. Because what I've seen from a lot of people that, I haven't worked with, or they're working with another person, or they're doing their podcast themselves, is their Instagram content and their podcast content are not like related in any way. And like on Instagram, they're like all in this launch, and then their podcast is like crickets and not talking anything about the launch that they're currently in. And I'm like, why aren't you utilizing this long form piece of content to actually support your launch? Like, that doesn't make any sense to me. But I guess a lot of people just kind of like forget about it, and they feel like they shouldn't be doing the same thing on different platforms because maybe they think that's too easy. But honestly, it makes it so much easier when you have that long form piece of content that you can kind of like adapt to your other channels. That doesn't mean you need to just use clips from the podcast. You can record different things, right, that are not really from the podcast, but it's going to be like kind of similar to the topic. You can record specific things for Instagram, because I know people get like weirded out about that. They're like, but like my exact podcast clips aren't going to be like performing well on Instagram. I was like, well, you can record something that's like specific to Instagram, but also ties back to your podcast in some way. So we really don't need to be reinventing the wheel on all channels. And and then I also have like a framework where, I have my clients like a certain percentage of their episodes are like sales focused, like 5% of their episodes every month are sales focused. So maybe that's one episode if they're doing weekly podcast. A certain percentage is myth busting, and a certain percentage is like, educational type episodes, so that they get to hit people where they're at. And, they're always having one sales focused episode a month. And it doesn't need to be like straight up like, here's my new program, kind of like explaining what it's about. It could be a case study from like a current client or a past client that, got good results. It could be, more salesy than that. There's different ways to kind of do the sales focused episode, but I think it's important that a lot of people don't do it. They just are like, have like a guest every single week. And it's okay to have a guest podcast, but you definitely want to shine light on yourself as the host as well, because most podcasts that just have 100% guests, they're not, people are like, oh, I love the host, but like they don't really know what they do. They don't know what they offer because they're always highlighting all these other people. And I think it's okay to have guests, but you also need to shine as the host too.
Mm-hmm.
So,
and I think that's where like it becomes disjointed, right? Because there are people who like the podcast is their business, like Diary of a CEO, right?
Yes.
Great podcast, all interviews, but Steven's not trying to get clients for himself, right?
Yes,
like
yes.
he's
making money off of
sponsorships for the
advertising
podcast.
and
Exactly.
But like that's not the
And
reality
so,
for majority of people, because majority of people do
Right.
not have that massive of an audience, right? So
right.
most people's reality is that they want to use their podcast in a way to get clients and customers into their business, not necessarily the podcast be the brand. The podcast is just a secondary piece, but it still can make you money. It's just you're not going to be doing sponsorships. And that's like what a lot of people think. Even today, I feel like it was more prevalent in like the early days, like 2020 to 2022. Everyone's like, I need to start a podcast and I'm going to bring on all these sponsors and stuff. I feel like that myth has kind of been busted a little bit, but there's still people that are like, okay, I've been podcasting for 3 months. Let me get sponsors. And I'm like, your numbers aren't quite there. Like for it to be lucrative, you need to be getting like at least 1,000 downloads per episode. And like most normal people do not reach that. And that's okay. But we have other ways to monetize that don't include ad sponsorships for like $250 a pop,
What are some of those ways?
Yeah, I mean, selling your own products and services, like being the host or the sponsor of your own show. I mean, if you guys have ever listened to like Amy Porterfield's show, she does that. She's like, this episode's sponsored by blah, blah, blah product or whatever. I don't do it that obviously. Like I just like, usually for me, I would, or clients, I have them like share a freebie or a low ticket product or something like that, and kind of do like a little ad segment, like, every episode's kind of like a next step. Like here's the episode, and then the whatever the product or freebie that I'm offering is like the next step to whatever the episode was. And then the main thing is I recommend getting them into your funnel, like we talked about earlier. Like that's your podcast can do the selling for you, but not everyone is going to buy directly from your podcast. So you need to have a different way for them to get to know more about you. And especially if they're brand new, because, with the SEO and podcast guesting, and they find your podcast, that might be their first time hearing you. They might need more. Whereas like there's going to be some people who found your podcast because they already followed you on social media, or they already were on your email list or something. So they have a more, a warmer relationship with you than someone that just found you from searching within the podcast app. So you kind of got to make content for both of those audiences in a way. Like some of my episodes are like more for my audience that already knows me, whereas some of my episodes are like more for like the people who are just discovering me for the first time. So,
and that's why I was saying earlier, like it's like different parts of the funnel. And so balancing all that. And I love what you said earlier about kind of having that framework of like a certain percentage allotted for certain things, to where it's like, yes, could a first time listener listen to a sales podcast? Of course. Right. But it's like, as long as you always have that CTA. And I want to kind of touch back, because I think that two things that you've mentioned kind of throughout this episode that are really difficult for women in my experience are like repeatability, like this fear of being annoying, and then selling, right? So there's a level of discomfort that I have seen with women in both of these areas, because they're like, well, I already said that over here, so I don't want to say it over here. But again, it goes back to like, you have to say it and say it and say it and say it and say it.
People aren't hanging on to every word that you say. We are being inundated with a million messages, a million things, especially, with a mom audience. Your kids are telling you a million things. You're getting a million business messages. Like there's just so much going on that someone's not going to remember what you said 3 weeks ago, let alone yesterday.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. So it's just like, again, another permission slip for anybody listening of like, I know you've said it, say it again, say it across all your platforms, say it a
Mm-hmm.
million times, repeat it in different ways, change the flavor, change the verbiage around
Yeah.
it a bit, but like you should be saying the same thing over and over again. Like that is
Right.
marketing. And then
Yeah.
when it comes to
That's how it
sales,
works.
exactly. When it comes
Yeah.
to sales, it's like we have to flex the muscle. Like there, you
Mm-hmm.
are not going to get better at selling by avoiding selling.
Yes.
So for people that may shy away from like having that call to action or like directly selling on their podcast or driving people or like maybe they're like, also if you like this thing, like the links in the bio, like how do you, because that's one of the things that I think is such a gap that I see across the board,
Yes.
not just in podcasting, but in businesses. I'm like, you are like a sales avoidant, right? To where like
Right.
you may have people interested, you may have people that kind of give you like pique their interest or inquire, and you're so casual about like
They don't take
trying
you
to
seriously.
sell. Yes.
Yeah,
So
they're like,
how do
does she
you,
even want me to buy this thing?
yes. So how do you tell people, especially within the podcast arena,
Yeah.
of like, how do you sell in a podcast in a way that feels aligned, in a way that
Yeah.
actually creates a next step in sales?
I think it's a muscle that you definitely need to just flex. You need to just, it's going to be uncomfortable at first, but it gets easier over time the more you're doing it. I found it for myself easier if like, I don't have like full scripts or anything for my show, but I do have like an outline. And at the
Mhm.
end, I always have like a little bit like, here's the next step that I'd want them to take based on this episode. So I have it kind of baked into that. So I'm not forgetting, because I feel like a lot of people, like, if it's not right in front of them, they're either going to forget or like they'll skip it because they know they can. They're like, oh, well, I didn't see it in front of me, so I don't have to say it. Another thing you can do is like a lot of podcast host companies have like ads that you can do like a pre-roll or mid-roll ads like baked in, and like this is
Yeah.
something you're uploading completely separately, so you're not like physically on the podcast saying it, like it just cuts in at the beginning or the middle. That's kind of an easy way to like do it without feeling salesy, because like you kind of forget that it's even there because it's just automatically running and you're not having to like say it at the end of the episode or in the middle of the episode or something like that. Or things like casual mentions of it. So if you're like at the end, you're going to be mentioning like a freebie that you have, like that's a little bit easier to sell than like an actual product. But usually I'll say like something like throughout the episode, like, we cover this a little bit deeper in the XYZ freebie that that I'm going to be sharing more about at the end or something like that. And that's much easier to like kind of weave it naturally into the content instead of like waiting until the very end to like say, okay, want more support with this? Here's the next step. So those are kind of easy ways to weave it in. But a lot of people, I like to start with like the pre-roll and mid-roll segments, because I feel like they forget about it after they record it. Like it's kind of hard to record at first because they're like, oh, I'm definitely like giving this salesy message. But once it gets rolling, they did forget that it's even out there. And then they're like, oh, look, I got a new person for my master class, or I got a new person for my $27 product or whatever it is. And they forget that it was even rolling, the whole time. So
Yeah, it's funny because I had one of my clients, I had her do exactly that. I was like, just every time we're going to launch something, just go ahead and record a small ad,
yeah.
send it over to the producer, and they can just bake it into your
Yeah, and they just put it
episodes.
in there. You don't even think about it.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. So I love that, and that's a little hack that's like you record it one time, and then it's all in all those episodes, so it's serving you
Yeah,
there.
it's doing what it needs to do, but you're not like actively trying to think about it and get out of it every time you record.
Yeah. So speaking of like within episodes, right? So
Mhm.
within episodes, obviously we see like people drop off at a certain time. We
Mhm.
see all these different things. So what are some things within episodes that people are listening to the whole thing, or that people find more engaging, or that people are taking a next step? What are some things that are happening within the episode that people that are creating that for people?
Yeah, I think it's really going to depend on your audience. I think it's fun to play with like different formats and see, like, for me, my audience, like, when I look at my stats, I only do like 15-minute episodes for the most part. And
Mhm.
most of my episodes are solo. Of course, if I had like a guest episode, it's going to be a little longer than 15 minutes, but I found that those get like a lower completion rate just because like moms are busy. Like they might only have 10 to 15 minutes. So like sometimes if they I noticed like they drop off around like 40%. So that means like, it's pretty close to, we strive for like a 50 plus percentage completion rate. And you can only find this in Apple Podcasts. Unfortunately, Spotify does not offer that, or any other platforms. You can't really find that information. But my clients and I strive for like 50+% per episode. And sometimes it gets to like 40 for guest episodes. So just play with different formats, see what works for your audience. They may be shorter. Shorter might be better for them. Maybe 30 minutes or less for certain audiences, just because, the likelihood of someone coming back to a show, if they, say they were driving their kids around to school or something, or going to pick up their kids from school, like the likelihood of people coming back to the show to like listen, just not always going to happen. Like they may or may not. Like I am like a loyal person, so I will come back and finish the episode, but like not everyone does that. They might just start a brand new show because they get left off and they kind of forgot, about it, or they would go to start it again and they're like, I don't even remember what the first half of this episode is about, so I'm not going to start from scratch. So kind of play around with the formats, play around with lengths and things like that, and just see what your audience likes. And it takes a bit to see, because like sometimes if you don't have a big enough audience, you're not going to see those numbers in Apple Podcasts, because it just, there's not enough data for it. But just play around with those numbers, see, different topics are going to have better completion rates too. Like some people might resonate with one topic more than another. Just keep an eye on that. Play around with the topics, the formats, the lengths, based on what you're seeing within your Apple Podcast stats. It's hard to say like what truly is going to like keep people around for more, but it's really going to be dependent on your specific audience. And for me, like an audience of moms, I found that shorter typically works better. And at the end, I always like to kind of tease, okay, next week we're going to be talking about this, and kind of give them like a little insight into what's coming next week to get them excited to come back for more. So I found that those two things work for me. But some people might like an hour-long podcast or an hour plus long podcast. My audience, not quite, but some people's audiences prefer that. So it just really depends on your particular audience and what's going to work. But I always like to do kind of like my call to action in the middle as well as at the end, so that if they don't make it to the end, they still got to hear like the call to action and stuff like that. If I'm doing it for like any like events that I do that are not evergreen, I like to do those at the pre-roll. So we'll have those go before I even start the episode. So like, because it's not directly tied to the episode, but it's something like that is applicable to the audience as a whole. So anything that's like not evergreen, I'll do at the beginning, but anything that is more evergreen, or it's directly related to the episode, then I'll put that in the middle. And then of course I do it like naturally at the end, not just like a baked in ad, not a like inserted one with like auto insertion. So
yeah. And I think like you said, two of my favorite things to do, which is like go back to your client and look at your data.
Yeah.
Like you don't have to make a lot of assumptions. Like I say this, I think when I'm talking about anything, I'm like, when we're trying to figure something out, like we sometimes are, just because we're creators and because we are problem solvers as entrepreneurs, we naturally are like, okay, so I could do this or I could do that. And I'm like, we could, or we could like put ourselves in the client seat. Put ourselves in the client seat, think about them, and then also look at the data. And I think too, it's like, sometimes it's the harder truth of like the content itself, right? Because it's like, when you think about marketing as a whole, whether it's email, whether it's social media, podcast, any sort of marketing, if it's not being consumed, or you're not seeing people, like you're not getting the traction that you wanted, it's like sometimes the content's not that good. And that may be like a hard pill for people to swallow, but it's like, that again goes back to your ideal client of like, you're speaking from you, you're not speaking for them.
Yeah, for sure. And another thing I always like to do, like probably once a year is what I typically do, is I do like a listener survey, and I have my clients do this as well. And it's just like an Airtable survey or something like that. And of course, not every single listener is going to fill it out, because like in a perfect world, that would be great, but that's just not reality. But I have them fill out this listener survey so I can get a little more data from them. Like, what type of business owner are you? What type of episodes do you like? For me, I ask them like, do you already have a podcast? Or are you planning on launching one? So I can get more data about like what my actual listeners, like what stage they're at, things like that. Cause you can see where people are tuning in from that's not very helpful. So I like to get them
Yeah.
more information. And I'm like, oh, what other podcasts do you listen to? I always ask them that because it's
Yeah.
interesting to see like what else they're into. And then just different questions like that. I like to do that once a year. And then, I do like an incentive, like, if you fill out this and you leave your email, you'll be entered to win either like a gift card to somewhere or maybe like a session with me or something like that, just to kind of incentivize it and give people a reason to fill it out. And, we shouldn't have to do that, but like people are busy. So it's nice to offer that little incentive because, I think the survey is like 10 to 15 questions, I would say. They're all pretty short. Most of them aren't like, actual fill in the blanks or anything like that. But, just incentivizing that, you can get that data from people because unfortunately the podcast hosts do not give us that much information.
Yeah, no, totally. This is super helpful. I feel like you've given us so many different tactical things that we could change about the podcast if we have one. I feel like, we've talked through what the podcast needs to have, how it fits in that bigger ecosystem. So I am so appreciative of everything that you have given us today, down to the frameworks and the types of episodes and what you've seen work and what doesn't work. I feel like this is really, really valuable for our listeners. So for anybody listening, tell them more about how they can work with you and where they can find you.
Yeah, so the best place to find me online is my podcast. Are we shocked? But yeah, so my podcast is called Podcasting for Moms. It's available on all of the different podcasting apps. And there you'll learn more about me and my offers and things like that. But if you just want like a quick shot to my website, it's just podcastingformoms.co. But yeah, that's where you can find me online.
Amazing. And is there anything, knowing who our audience is, that these are moms out there doing the thing, building these empires, raising babies, is there anything from your personal experience and building your business that you feel like it's really important for them to know today?
Yeah, I would just say, like, if you've been thinking about starting a podcast and you haven't pulled the trigger yet, like, I would just say, like, go for it. I feel like the world needs more mom entrepreneurs or more moms in general, like, sharing their voice. And I think what everyone has to say is valuable. There's a place for it. I think a lot of people think podcasting is oversaturated, but I read a stat the other day and there's only like 400,000 something active podcast. Whereas like YouTube channels and blogs, there is like millions. So there's really not that many active podcasts out there. And when I'm doing like podcast guest research for myself and clients, like I come across way more inactive shows than not. Like shows that ended in like 2020 or 2023. Like there's way more room for podcasts out there. People think it's oversaturated, but it's not. It's like one of the least saturated long form content streams. So just saying.
Wow. What a great, great reminder. Well, thank you so much, Jenny, for your time today. We will put everything, all your links and everything in the show notes, and definitely check out her podcast and reach out to her if you do have any questions about podcasting. And thank you guys for joining us today, and we'll see you next week.